Okay.
Okay. And
today, Da will host this meeting.
okay. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Anup.
Hey.
Hi, hello.
Hello. So today we are going to have some topics to discuss, and I will host this meeting this week. Next week will be Fogdong to host the meeting. I mean next time, 2 weeks later. So three of us will like to host the meeting in turn.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay. Jianbo, you disable the screen sharing, so I cannot share the screen now.
I have turned it on.
Okay, it's okay now. All right. Yeah, can you see my browser?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is today's agenda. So first of all, I would like to introduce a new mechanism for the community meeting discussion. So now we have a repo called the KubeVela Community. So you can go to this repository and you can see that there are some schedules of the meetings in the issue part. So we will add some issues for each week's agenda on these issues. So if you would like to have something to discuss, and you can for example, if you want to discuss something 2 weeks later, you can just reply to this issue or go to some add some links. It is okay to post anything you want. And for example, we also have a Chinese community meeting, and some contributors are already posting issues on here. So if you would like to have some particular issues to discuss on this meeting, you can post it here. It is also okay if you do not post it here, but you just raise it up during the meeting. I think it's okay. It's open to discuss, only if we have the time to discuss about it. Okay, so this is the first topic of this today's meeting. Do you guys have any questions about it?
So Diane, just want to confirm what you just stated is that there would be an issue for every meeting that is already created under this repository. And what you're saying is that if we have something to discuss, you add that as comments to that specific issue, or do you want us to create new issues?
I mean, you can reply to it, not create a new one.
Got it.
Yes,
yeah.
just
So
comment.
Yes.
Comment on that issue. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
So I mean, like if you have something not very details to discuss, you can like go to the our core lib here, and you can post some issues. And after that, you can reply in the community repo and add the links to that issue.
Okay. Okay, so the previous Google Doc is no longer in use, right?
Sorry, I didn't follow it.
Yeah, no, the Google Doc that we used to basically use for this type of stuff, like the attendees and all that stuff, that is no longer.
No. We will still maintain the Google Doc. And the Google Doc is something that we record our meeting history, but we need some places to prepare the agenda. So we use the issue to prepare, and we will create the issue 2 weeks or more before our meeting.
Okay, I think it's a good idea. Sure.
Yes, we hope this this behavior can make our community more open and makes discussion more efficiently. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and I also prepared something for today's topic. And for example, if you would like to add some attachment, you can also post it in the issue right here. Yeah, so if we do not have any questions for the first topic, we will go to the next one. So the next one will have a brief introduction to the key features, which we will like to release in KubeVela version 1.4, which will be released at the end of this month. Yeah. So the two key features we would like to introduce today, one of that is the velad project, and the other one is the authentication and authorization mechanism in KubeVela, which is not introduced before version 1.3. So these two are brand new topics, and some works have been done in these areas. So I would like to have some brief introduction to these topics and explain how they work and what they are going to do. So both of these two mechanisms are already merged into the master branch of KubeVela. So if you would like to have a try, you can go to the KubeVela version 1.4 alpha version and try it. So for the first one, we would like to introduce the velad project. Yeah. So actually, the velad project is also a brand new repo, and which is outside the KubeVela core repo. So you can go to the repo here, and there are some introductions to the project and some installation guides which you can refer to if you want to try it. So what is the velad project? So we have encountered some scenarios that users wants to install KubeVela as a control plane to their clusters, and but they might not have a separate Kubernetes cluster for installing the KubeVela. So someone thinks that we should have some ways to run the Kubernetes control, run the KubeVela control plane outside the Kubernetes. So we have this project which is using the K3s project as the underlying implementation for the Kubernetes, and we run a small KubeVela controller inside the K3s cluster, and so that after packaging it, you can install the velad project into some virtual machine or other physical machine without an existing Kubernetes cluster as a control cluster. So besides, the velad project also includes all the images and the binaries which are required for installing KubeVela. So by downloading the velad binary executable file, you would not need to have any network access to install the KubeVela control plane. So it is very useful if you want to install it in some offline environment. So this is the first intuition for the velad project, and you can see that the overview of the architecture of velad is illustrated here. One thing I would like to mention is that except for the installation outside the Kubernetes cluster, we also support like exchanging the external storage from etcd to other storage like Mysql as the underlying storage. So this is used for if you want to store your Kubernetes data outside the etcd, but in some commercial databases or other storage, you can use the external storage. Besides, if the control plane is done, you can also recover it by rerun the velad project and specify the external storage to use, so that the data part and the execution part of the control plane is separated. It could make your deployments more robust and recoverable. And also the cluster gateway components and other CRDs and the definitions which are required by the multi-cluster control plane of KubeVela are natively installed inside the K3s cluster. And you can also add other either existing Kubernetes clusters or other K3s clusters to the control plane to manage them as well. Another thing is like the velad UX project is not currently installed inside the velad project, but we would like to add it in future plans. So the velad project might be a bit larger than now. So generally, this is the project we would like to release in version 1.4. I'm not sure if you have any questions about this project.
I do, Diane. So one question, this is, so you mentioned about offloading the data into a separate storage. Is that only for the velad installation of KubeVela, or does that work also for the existing KubeVela that's installed in, say, existing Kubernetes clusters? Can we offload from etcd into a more robust data store? And if that is true, the question I have is performance. How does that work in terms of performance?
Right. So the first question, I think the answer is no now. So currently the external storage we provided here is kind of a capability of K3s cluster. So it's not the native way for Kubernetes cluster to handling data. So if you install the KubeVela on other Kubernetes clusters outside the K3s cluster, it's currently unable to store it in external storage. But we would like to extend some use cases in the common scenario that some of the data we would like to provide an alternative way to store. For example, the version the data stored in the application revision or in the resource tracker or other application related configurations. There are some voices in the community that users want to store them in some external storage. One of the requirements of a large commercial user is to store them in the Mysql storage, and they are also looking into it. But I'm not sure when we will release that feature. We still need some time to investigate it more.
Sounds good, Diane. Do you mind sharing why they want to move to MySQL? Why? I mean, is it primarily for data, data recovery, or is there any other use case that'll be, robust by moving into MySQL?
So you mean other storage?
Yeah, into other storage. Yeah.
Yeah, I think other storage is also possible. So from my point, I think the storage part in KubeVela should be some interface which should be able to extend it very easily. So from my view, I think like for the first thinking of this problem, I would prefer to use MongoDB as the alternative storage. But there are also users that's like MySQL more. So we have different ideas, but I think the the interface parts should be aligned together so that users can have their own implementations for other storage. Only if their storage driver have the same interface that we use in KubeVela.
Perfect. Makes sense.
I need to add some details about velad. The velad project is mainly rely on the K3S project. This project is a lightweight Kubernetes. It's not a native Kubernetes. So the capability to use MySQL storage instead of etcd is also provided by K3S. And the velad project is mainly for quick preview for KubeVela and air-gapped installation. When people want to try KubeVela and without having a Kubernetes cluster, then he can use velad and install the Kubernetes cluster and KubeVela controller and along with other add-ons very quick. So he can try it. And also the K3S is also growing very fast, and I think we can somehow relying this project to provide some robust and the alternative storages. And another question is for without velad project, KubeVela is also trying to add alternative storages, but we won't remove etcd totally. We will reduce some data from it, just like Da just said.
Sounds good.
I have a question, not exactly related with velad, but I was taking a look to the other day to try to familiarize myself better with KubeVela. Do you have any further information on the cluster gateway on this managed line? Like, I have some doubts about how it works, let's say.
Okay,
do you know if there is any public document about this?
Gateway?
Yeah, like the interaction between cluster gateway and the managed cluster. I mean, it's not related with velad, just with the KubeVela itself. I don't know if there is any public documentation available for that.
Okay, so I think we can have some brief introduction for the cluster gateway. So primarily, the cluster gateway is also a separate project other than the KubeVela, and it is used not only by KubeVela but also many other projects, such as the OCM and other multi-cluster related management projects. So the cluster gateway is generally an API server for the API server extension for the Kubernetes system. So generally, it works like making some proxy requests to the API servers inside the managed cluster, so that from the hub cluster, if you for example, if you want to get some pod information in the managed cluster, you can send requests to the hub cluster, and the hub cluster will recognize this request and redirect it to the cluster gateway service. And the cluster gateway will recognize which cluster it would like to redirect, and then resend this request to the API server inside the managed cluster.
I have just sent a picture to you in Dingding. You can open that picture and introduce.
Okay. Right. So this is the general working mechanism for cluster gateway.
The screen is still in Chrome and didn't see any.
Sorry. So if it's still in, I think I need to
You can also open the cluster gateway GitHub repo.
Oh, I see.
Just the README picture.
Right. So here is the project.
Okay.
And
yeah, Dai is also one of the main author of this project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a cooperation with the OCM team.
Yeah. So just one quick question, and we can get back to that. Like, what you send actually to the other cluster is like the render component, right? Like you don't need to install this the CRDs in the target clusters.
Not like that. I think if the workload itself is already have CRD in the managed cluster, you don't need to install any CRD, and the Vela application CRD won't installed in the managed cluster. So the application will render the result and then deploy to the managed clusters.
Okay. Okay, then I understand it correctly. Okay, thanks.
Yes, and there are two ways to proxy the object information. One is directly using kubeconfig secret, and another way is use open cluster management in a pool mode.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, we can schedule a more detailed meeting next time if you have some more questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let me get back to probably like the issue. I will add an item in the agenda if needed.
Yeah.
I think it matches what I understood from the code. So let me get back to it, and I will add an item on the agenda to discuss a little bit more about this.
Sure.
Okay. So if you have any more questions for the cluster gateway, actually you can write some comments in the community repo. And also, if you would like to have more introductions for the cluster gateway part, you can also make some comments. So if possible, we could even invite authors from the OCM team to have some introduction. Yeah. I'm sure they are also interested to make their techniques more.
I think that'd be great. Yeah. I mean, if they can join like one day and talk a little bit about this, that'd be great. I think
that'll be helpful. Jimbo, just want to make sure what you mentioned to Daniel is that using the cluster manager, you can render the Kubernetes object, but the CRDs or the supporting things need to be available in the managed cluster already prior to the Kubernetes object being rendered by the control cluster. Is that accurate?
Sorry, the question, I'm not very understanding it.
Sure, I think I'll reserve it for later, but essentially what I understood was that you need to have the CRDs already installed in the managed cluster for utilizing that for a rendered object to be using those features.
Let me use an example to explain it. If you have one CRD, you want to use it. For example, you want to use Argo CD or Flux CD. Then there are two ways for using the multi-cluster feature. One way is to install the Argo CD CRD first and manually in the managed cluster. And the second one is use the add-on mechanism from KubeVela. And then your KubeVela application will have Flux CD as a component, and it will render the result of the Flux CD object and deliver it into the managed cluster. So the managed cluster needs the Flux CD CRD.
Yeah, I understood. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So any more questions?
I think we can continue.
Okay. So the next part I would like to introduce is the authentication part for KubeVela. So before version 1.3, we do not have any authentication module for the KubeVela controller. So actually, if you create some applications inside the cluster, the KubeVela controller will dispatch the resources controlled by the application, but the dispatch of those resources are using the identity of the KubeVela controller. So actually, it will cause some like permission escalation. I think like Daniel previously also talks about this issue. So since we have developed this feature in version 1.4, I would like to give a brief introduction to how we managed to do it in the new version of KubeVela. So the main target of this feature is to let the KubeVela controller to use the real identity of the creator of the application when it creates update resources inside the application. So basically, we rely on the impersonation mechanism of Kubernetes. So the workflow, so the data flow of the request is illustrated here, and also this feature is also available for the multi-cluster scenario. So you can have detailed roles and role bindings inside the managed cluster to control the users to control the permission of the user inside different managed clusters. So let's say if user wants to create a new application now, so the create request for the application will first go to the API server inside the hub cluster, and then it will be received by the mutating admission webhook of KubeVela, and the mutating admission webhook will recognize the creation request, the user info of the creation request, and basically it's the username and the group of the request, and then it will attach those information into the application. Like bind those information inside the application's annotation. Then we can see that the application will carry some identity information. And this identity information cannot be polluted since all the requests to the application will be handled by the mutating admission webhook. So there is no identity fake during this process. After that, the application will carry the identity information. Then the KubeVela application controller will reconcile the application. During the dispatch process of the resources, it will use the impersonation mechanism of Kubernetes to impersonate as the real identity behind the application and use this identity to create resources. So that if the user do not have some privileges to create some resource, it will be rejected by the API server now. And then the KubeVela will stop the KubeVela application will stop creating resource since there is an error returned by the API server. So generally, this is the authentication workflow for the hub cluster. So what will happen in multi-cluster scenario? So if the application controller wants to create some resource inside the managed cluster, it will first send the request to the cluster gateway service, and then the cluster gateway service will redirect this request to the Kube API server inside the managed cluster. And the cluster gateway service will also carry the impersonation information and then make the impersonation request to the API server inside the managed cluster, so that the identity carried by the application will also be used during the impersonation process inside the managed cluster. So that if you do not have the permission inside your managed cluster, it will be rejected by the kube API server inside the managed cluster as well. So actually the authentication part works generally the same between the hub cluster and the managed cluster. So with this mechanism, you would not be able to deliver resources outside your permission, and also there is you cannot fake to work as another user if you do not have the permission to do it. Also, we are working on some Vela CLI commands to help you assign roles and role bindings in managed cluster, and we will also release this feature in version 1.4. Okay, so is there any questions?
Yeah, I think this is pretty helpful. Actually, I was playing with this the other day, based on the other discussion. I will probably need to get back to you. Like, I was not able to actually launch it properly. Like, I think I misconfigured somehow, like the Vela release. I was using alpha, I don't know which number. If you have any like copy and paste deployment for how to activate this, like, because I think it was not activated by default.
Okay, so actually we do not have any detailed documentation for the installation at this time, but it will be like at the end of this month.
I mean, if for me, like having like use this deployment is enough. Like I'm not asking for like a, let's say, a proper large documentation. You have like, okay, set up these parameters when launching the Vela core deployment.
Yeah, there are some parameters to use.
Because I tried and I was not able to make it work as expected. So I think I misconfigured something. So if you can,
I know your problem. So actually, there are some. Let me get some comment for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, there is a command. Let's say. Okay. So if you install KubeVela with the Helm, you can use this parameter.
Okay, if you can copy paste this to the chat, that will be awesome. And I
can create a GitHub list.
Okay, or link it maybe to the community or something like that.
You can also comment it on our agenda and.
Right. I forget it.
We can record it.
Yeah.
And the next time we release Alpha 3, we can add this command on it.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you through Slack, but I mean, this week for me was like crazy, and I didn't have time to.
Sorry, I haven't prepared a very detailed installation
guide.
I
mean, it's normal. I mean, like we are all working on this stuff, and I completely understand. I mean, it is helpful enough.
And feel free to ask it from Slack next time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was going to do it, but I then changed to another task. I forgot it completely, and I changed the topic to other stuff and didn't have like proper mental time to get back to you. But I will do it. Don't worry.
Okay. So actually, if you I would like also to give you some details for the installation. Generally, if you do not set up this parameter, the authentication mechanism will not work completely. So if you do not set it enabled, you can also fake as other people to create anything you want without your any privileges to be checked, since every request will use the KubeVela controller's privilege, which is very large.
Okay.
Yeah, and also there are also some considerations for the default parameters for KubeVela authentication. It's like, as I said, the identity information here is composed by the username and the group information, but actually by default, only the group information will be carried. This is advice from the other team that if you carry the username and the group concurrently to the managed cluster, it will like to expose some mappings of your username and group. And this information could be credential inside the hub cluster, and they might do not want managed cluster to know it. So by default, we will not carry the username part, and only the group part will be used in the identity. But it is also possible to open it. Yeah, so there is some detailed configurations. So if you encounter some problems associated with it, we can discuss more about it, and I will explain how to overcome these difficulties.
Okay, thanks. I'll try it with this, and I will get back to you, or even, through the Slack or in the next community call to see to get your feedback about what happened. So I'll do it.
Great. We are also looking forward to some feedback for this new feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So if there is more questions about it, I think there is the last issue I would like to discuss. It's a small issue about the cloud resource part. So I think Anup might be interested with this problem. So currently in KubeVela, we are doing some work to refactor the deploy workflow step. So beyond cloud resources, basically all the components in KubeVela now, like the web service component, all the Helm typed components, we are using a new workflow step called deploy to dispatch those component resources into multi-clusters. But for cloud resources, there are some differences other than other common resource. So we are discussing about if we should treat those cloud resources, particularly the Terraform typed component. So should they be treated differently, or should they be treated unifiedly? So one of the concrete use case is like if you have a Terraform component and another, for example, another Kubernetes deployment declared in your application. There are two components, and by now we need to dispatch them one by one. They cannot be handled together. So there are some orders between their dispatch, and also we cannot make them to work together very properly. But one of the possible work in the future is to make their dispatch concurrently, so that users can set up a new Terraform resource and the Kubernetes deployment at the same time. But as for the cloud resource, one of the team members mentioned that generally those cloud resource requires some budget and money costs, so which are very sensitive and should be restrictive during the deploy process. So they should be treated very carefully and not mixed with other components. So I'm not sure if Anup, in your use case, you have the similar problems, or you have any other ideas for what we should do with the cloud resource?
I'm sorry, Anoop has just left the meeting, and
sorry,
he's going to have another meeting, and I think he will watch the video, and
okay.
I hope he will reply you from the Slack after he seeing this.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me rephrase what you said to check if I got it. Like,
okay,
is the proposal to have like a workflow step called, I don't know, deploy component and deploy Terraform, for example, and use them independently of the component? Or are you planning having like, or the alternative is like having a deploy component that takes different paths depending on the stuff?
Similar like that, not completely the same component, but I mean one of the way to do it is to have two different workflow steps. The other way is to unify them inside one workflow step to handle different components.
I will say, like, just as an initial thought, like probably in this particular case, having like a different workflow step will enable a specific configuration for this type of step. Like if I'm creating cloud resources, maybe there is a particular policy or something like that, that I want to apply. Like, I don't know, depending on what I'm trying to create, like which is the resource of the, or even the, I don't know, something common like a target account ID or something like that.
Yeah.
That could potentially, instead of having like an spec for the workflow step that is too complex in itself, maybe having something that is particular for this makes sense just for this.
I see. So you would prefer to use a separate workflow step to handle those complex cloud resource components.
I will also say that probably like debugging errors in that stage is easier if you have a specific workflow step. Like, I think it could be simpler or more helpful in that sense. Obviously, you can do it either way.
But right, I think you are right.
I will say, like, if we think about what will be like the future of this type of, let's imagine that apart from Terraform, in the future we have another stuff that is not Terraform, like we have, I don't know, Pulumi, something like that, which is also, which probably will mean like instead of having like spec Terraform, spec Pulumi, maybe having like spec cloud resource and then another type or something like that. But maybe if we think about the thing that we are doing with policies for component, if we extend that to the final deployment or the workflow itself, I see some potential for configuration there.
I see. So, so there might be more different types of component in the future outside the Terraform cloud resource, but I think we are not. We do not have a very some very concrete targets to achieve for the future.
Yeah, no, I will also say that I was also thinking like if we think about like what Kubernetes did with the different cloud providers, at the end of the day, like having a specific like kind of plugins for them was useful because there was a clear separation in this is kind of like the core community, like deploying a component, let's say within Kubernetes, and the people probably developing even like the Terraform stuff or whatever comes next is maybe a different group of developers also.
So if we have a new type of resource, you can also write some plugin to help handle the dispatch process of it. So this could be the future of KubeVela extensions. Yeah, I think in this way, make separate treatment for them is more reasonable.
I think it's like more maintainable, probably. Like if somebody opens a box and say, hey, I am an expert in Terraform and there is an issue in here, it will be easier for that developer to contribute back because the target elements or code that he needs to understand is less, that if we have like a huge rendering step, which every chain will impact basically the whole core of Kuberla.
Yeah. Right.
But
I agree with that.
This is my just first impression, right? So take it with that.
I think the idea is good, and I like it, because actually we were not thinking much about extending more component types, and so the idea of the plugin for extending those resources or resource types I didn't come up with them. So when I was evaluating the different solutions, yeah, so I was preferring the unified solution, but actually I also neglect the possibility for extending more resource types in the future. So if like we have many different types of resources to be handled differently, then if we use improper unified form to handle them, it might make the code to explode and hard to manage.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable. Yeah. Okay. So that's all for today's prepared agenda. So if you have any other issues like to discuss, we can also raise up here.
Okay, great. That was pretty helpful.
Okay, so let's see if there is any other. Okay, is there anything in the chat box? There's none, and it's only 3 of us. Okay, so that's all for today's meeting. Okay, so Daniel, if you have any more questions you come up with later, you can also post some issues in the GitHub, and also any questions for the authentication part, you can directly reach out me on the Slack channel. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Da.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.